Speaker, this morning, Sir Martin Morbick published the final report of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. And I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking him, the members of the inquiry and the whole team for their dedicated work. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak directly to the bereaved families, the survivors and those in the immediate Grenfell community, some of whom are with us in the gallery today. Sir Martin concluded this morning, and I'm afraid there's no way of repeating this that won't be painful. He said the simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and that those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by, as the report lays out in full, just about every institution responsible for ensuring their safety. Mr. Speaker, in the face of an injustice so painful, so deserving of anger, words can begin to lose their meaning. 7 years still waiting for the justice that you deserve. I want to say very clearly on behalf of the country, you've been let down so badly, before, during and in the aftermath of this tragedy. And while Sir Martin sets out a catalogue of appalling industry failures, for which there must now be full accountability, he also finds, and I quote, decades of failure by central government. He concludes that in the years between the fire at Knowsley Heights in 1991 and the fire at Grenfell Tower in 2017, there were many opportunities for the government to identify the risks posed by the use of combustible cladding panels and insulation. And he concludes, and I quote, by 2016, the department was well aware of those risks, but failed to act on what they knew. He further finds that the department itself was poorly run, and the government's deregulatory agenda dominated the department's thinking to such an extent that even matters affecting the safety of life were ignored, delayed, or disregarded. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to start with an apology on behalf of the British state to each and every one of you, and indeed to all of the families affected by this tragedy. It should never have happened. The country failed to discharge its most fundamental duty, to protect you and your loved ones, the people that we are here to serve, and I am deeply sorry. I also want to express my admiration for the strength it must have taken to relive these events when giving your evidence to the inquiry, and indeed to see written down today the circumstances that led to the death of your loved ones. After all you've been through, you may feel you're always one step away from another betrayal. I get that, and I know I cannot change that with just words today. But what I can say is I listened carefully to one of the members of the inquiry, Ali Akbar, this morning, who said this: what is needed is for those with responsibility for building safety to reflect and to treat Grenfell as a touchstone in all that they do in the future. Mr. Speaker, I consider myself someone responsible for building safety, and that is exactly what I will do and what I'll demand of this government. Mr. Speaker, today is a long-awaited day of truth, but it must now lead to a day of justice. Yes. Justice for the victims and the families of Grenfell, but also a moment to reflect on the state of social justice in our country, and a chance for this government of service to turn the page. Because this tragedy poses fundamental questions about the kind of country we are, a country where the voices of working class people and those of colour have been repeatedly ignored and dismissed. A country where tenants of a social housing block in one of the richest parts of the land are treated like second-class citizens, shamefully dismissed, in the words of one survivor, as people with needs and problems not respected as citizens, as people who contribute to Britain, who are part of Britain, who belong in Britain. And Mr. Speaker, unbelievably, this continued even after the tragedy. Sir Martin highlights, and I quote, certain aspects of the response demonstrated a marked lack of respect for human decency and dignity, and left many of those immediately affected feeling abandoned by authority and utterly helpless. Mr. Speaker, that alone should make anyone who feels any affinity towards justice bristle with anger. But Sir Martin continues. He finds, and these are his words, Mr. Speaker, systematic dishonesty on the part of those who made and sold the rain screen cladding panels and insulation products. And he goes on to say, they engaged in deliberate and sustained strategies to manipulate the testing process, misrepresent test data, and mislead the market. Sir Martin also cites a complete failure on the part of the local authority building control over a number of years to take basic steps to ensure that the certificates it issued were technically accurate. He finds that the work of the Building Research Establishment was marred by unprofessional conduct, inadequate practices, a lack of effective oversight, poor reporting, and a lack of scientific rigour, and that the tenant management organisation must bear a share of the blame. Its only fire safety assessor, these are his words, had misrepresented his experience and qualifications, some of which he invented, and was ill-informed to carry out fire risk assessments on buildings of the size and complexity of Grenfell Tower. He also finds a chronic lack of effective management and leadership on behalf of the London Fire Brigade, with tragic consequences on the night of the fire. Mr. Speaker, in the light of such findings, it is imperative that there is full accountability, including through the criminal justice process, and that this happens as swiftly as possible. So I can tell the House today that this government will write to all companies found by the inquiry to be part of these horrific failings as the first step to stopping them being awarded government contracts. And we will, of course, support the Metropolitan Police and the prosecutors as they complete their investigations. But, Mr. Speaker, it is vital that as we respond to this report today, we do not do or say anything that could compromise any future prosecution, because the greatest injustice of all would be for the victims and all those affected not to get the justice that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, there must also be more radical action to stop something like this from ever happening again, because one of the most extraordinary qualities of the Grenfell community is their determination to look forward. They are not only fighting for justice for themselves, they are fighting to ensure that no other community suffers as they have done. Mr. Speaker, some important reforms have taken place in the last 7 years, reforms that we supported in opposition, including banning combustible cladding, new oversight of building control, a new safety regime for all residential buildings over 18 metres, new legal requirements on social landlords, making sure fire and rescue services are trained and equipped to handle large-scale incidents, including moving from stay put to get out when needed. And we're now addressing the recommendation from St Martin's first report to introduce a new residential personal emergency evacuation plan policy for anyone whose ability to evacuate could be compromised, and funding from this from renting in social housing. Mr. Speaker, we will look at all 58 of Sir Martin's recommendations in detail. There will be a debate on the floor of this House. We will respond in full to the inquiry's recommendations within 6 months, and we will update Parliament annually on our progress against every commitment that we make. But there are some things I can say right now. There are still buildings today with unsafe cladding, and the speed at which this is being addressed is far, far too slow. We only have to look at the fire in Dagenham last week, a building that was still in the process of having its cladding removed. So this must be a moment of change. We'll take the necessary steps to speed this up. We will be willing to force freeholders to assess their buildings and enter remediation schemes within set timetables, with a legal requirement to force action if that is what it takes. And we will set out further steps on remediation this autumn. We will also reform the construction products industry that make this fatal cladding so homes are made of safe materials. And those who compromise that safety will face the consequences. We will ensure that tenants and their leaseholders can never again be ignored, and that social landlords are held to account for the decency and safety of their homes. And as this government tackles the most acute housing crisis in living memory, building 1.5 million new homes across the country, we will ensure those homes are safe, secure, and built to the highest standards. Places of security, health and well-being that serve the needs of residents and their wider communities. Because a safe and decent home is a human right and a basic expectation, and the provision of that right should never be undermined by the reckless pursuit of greed. One of the tragedies of Grenfell is that this is a community that nurtured so much of what we want from housing. People who had made the tower their home and were entitled to a place of safety and security, not a death trap. And yet, time and again, they were ignored. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, I made a private visit to Grenfell Tower and laid a wreath at the memorial wall, and affirmed this government's commitment to the work of the Memorial Commission, delivering a permanent memorial on the site through a process led by the Grenfell community. As I walked down that narrow staircase from the 23rd floor and looked at walls burned by 1,000-degree heat, I got just a sense of how utterly, utterly terrifying it must have been. And as I saw examples of the cladding on the outside of the building and listened to descriptions of the catastrophic and completely avoidable failures of that fatal refurbishment, I felt just a sense of the anger that now rises through that building. And it left me, Mr. Speaker, with a profound and very personal determination to make the legacy of Grenfell Tower one of the defining changes to our country that I want to make as Prime Minister. To the families, the survivors and the immediate community, we will support you now and always, especially those that were children. In the memory of your loved ones, we will deliver a generational shift in the safety and quality of housing for everyone in this country. And in the memory of Grenfell, we will change our country, not just a change in policy and regulation, although that must of course take place, but a profound shift in culture and behaviour. A rebalancing of power that gives voice and respect to every citizen, whoever they are and wherever they live. And Mr. Speaker, we will bring the full power of government to bear on this task, because that is the responsibility of service and the duty we owe to the memory of every one of the 72. And in that spirit, I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by thanking the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, especially given the timing of Prime Minister's question time. And can I also associate myself and everyone on this side of the House with the Prime Minister's powerful words regarding the pain of the bereaved families, survivors, and all those affected by the tragic events surrounding Grenfell Tower. Many are with us today in the gallery, and I want to pay tribute to their strength and patience in waiting for this moment. It is not hyperbole to say that we would not be here today without them. It was their tenacity and strength that brought the truth to light, and for that they deserve our thanks. Their search for truth and justice is a noble one and has our full support. And whilst the Grenfell community's loss will have left a hole nothing will ever be able to fill, I hope that whatever healing is possible from today, that each and every one of them takes some small measure of it. I know they will never forget the 72 people who tragically lost their lives, and nor shall we. Today's publication, as the Prime Minister said, is, to put it bluntly, a damning indictment of over 30 years of successive state failures, stretching as far back as Knowsley Heights in 1991 and then multiple incidents from there. Sir Martin Morbick and the work of the inquiry have painted a picture of systemic indifference, failure, and in some notable cases, dishonesty and greed. Sir Martin and the team working on the inquiry are to be commended for the depth and rigour of their work. And Mr. Speaker, while such a comprehensive report as has been published today deserves to be considered in full, and I welcome the Prime Minister's commitments for time in this House to do that, there are some immediate points that I feel will command support across the House and that I'll address to the Prime Minister. First, the work to remediate and, where possible, identify new at-risk buildings must continue if we are to meet, as I'm confident the whole House would agree, the Right Honourable former member for Maidenhead's pledge that no such tragedy could occur again. I know this task is not a simple one, and I thank the Prime Minister for recognising the importance of this issue. A significant barrier to making progress quicker is financial liability. It was an issue I was all too aware of when I became Chancellor, and why one of the first major spending decisions I made was the creation of a new £1 billion fund to pay for remediation works in public and private buildings affected by materials beyond dangerous ACM cladding. And the previous government's cladding safety scheme has ensured an additional £5.1 billion is available to support remediation work, coming from a combination of a developer contribution and a building safety levy. So I'd ask the Prime Minister and Chancellor to give due consideration to any further requests, especially with the upcoming fiscal event towards the end of October. The second point I'm confident that the Prime Minister would agree on is the need to maintain and update our legal and regulatory framework to keep pace with changes in materials, construction and supply. The last Parliament passed the Fire Safety Act in 2021, but also the Building Safety Act in 2022. And I acknowledge, as the Prime Minister said, that he worked constructively with the then government to deliver those improvements. These pieces of legislation comprehensively reformed our fire safety and building regulation regimes and ensured that a new building safety regulator was created, located in the Health and Safety Executive. But I also know that these are stepping stones towards a fire and building safety regime that remains persistently fit for purpose. And in particular, I'd urge the Prime Minister to give special attention to the recommendations in today's report, especially its call for more regular updating of approved Document B, a single regulator, a sole Secretary of State responsible to end the fragmentation of Whitehall responsibilities, and a new Chief Construction Advisor. And I want the Prime Minister to know that should he deem further legislation to support proportionate and necessary measures to protect the public, whilst protecting leaseholders from excessive costs is required, then we will work collegiately with him to deliver that. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, allied to the need for continued improvement in the legal and regulatory frameworks, this report also shines a light on the significant failures of oversight. Those responsible for ensuring the independence and rigour of testing and compliance were found by this report to have had those very things compromised. In particular, the BRE, in its work with suppliers, in part enabled what Sir Martin Morbick's report has plainly described as systemically dishonest behaviour on the part of suppliers. So I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to continue to support the Metropolitan Police and Crown Prosecution Service in pursuing any appropriate criminal charges against a small number of developers and contractors who knowingly and fraudulently cut corners on building safety for greed and financial gain. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to let this moment pass without also acknowledging the local failures today's report highlights, whether from the tenant management organisation responsible for the building itself, who allowed relationships with those living in Grenfell Tower to become so broken that tenants were marginalised and at worst ignored, the repeated fire safety reports that were not acted on, the lack of effective management and leadership at London Fire Brigade, and the local council, who had a lack of adequate oversight into the management and maintenance of the building and the cares and concerns of those living in it. Mr. Speaker, there will be further lessons to learn from this inquiry. There will be difficult questions for all those responsible acting over a long period of time. And I know that the Prime Minister will agree that we must approach those questions with the honesty and directness with which they deserve. And let me conclude, Mr. Speaker. At the time, the former Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead apologised to the victims for what she described as failures at a local and national level in response to the fire. I share in those same words still. I think today, however, demands more. As a Prime Minister, current or former, you are a custodian of the state. And its failures, whether on your watch or not, are something that you feel deeply. And to that end, I want to extend my deepest apologies to the families and victims of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The state let you down, and it must never do so again. Mr. Speaker, the mission to ensure no such tragedy can ever happen again is one I know the whole House supports. But more than that, it is part of a legacy we must create and maintain so that our actions meet the full meaning of our words.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for the tone and the substance of his response. We do owe it to the victims, their families and the community to work together to ensure that they can get the justice that they deserve and that we make this a turning point that means that this will never happen again. There will be a debate for the whole House to participate because I know there will be an opportunity to ask questions today, but members and honourable members will want to make substantive contributions on this tragic issue, but also, no doubt, issues of concern in their own constituencies in relation to cladding and fire safety. So we'll make sure that time is available. I welcome his approach to working jointly, as we were able to do in opposition ourselves, particularly on the remediation work, which is behind schedule, needs to speed up, and we need to do all we can on that. On the financial liability, this is obviously an issue, and we'll look across to the sufficiency of that. On the legal and regulatory framework, obviously changes have been made already. I do think further changes are going to be necessary. We'll share that with the opposition as soon as we've got some realistic proposals to put before the House, and I think if we can then join together in passing the necessary legislation as quickly as possible, that will be a mark of our determination to treat this as a turning point. And I share in his comments about criminal proceedings. Clearly we don't want to prejudice those criminal proceedings, but I don't think anybody could read this report and not be absolutely shocked at the description of some of the dishonesty. This was not just
You actually made it to the end of the video. Thank you for watching the video. If you would like to subscribe to the channel, which, why haven't you already, is somewhere over there. And also, if you want to watch more videos, also check out over there. I've been Jake from Just Jake. See you later.